I'm a 37-year-old man, and my wife and I have been together for 15 years, married for 10. From early on, we both dreamed of having a family. I come from a big family, and my wife has always wanted kids, picturing 3 or 4 since she was young. But life doesn't always go as planned. Right after our wedding, we started trying, but things just didn't work out. We tried everything over the years: doctor visits, IVF, endless testing. Nothing worked. We even had a couple of hopeful pregnancies, but they ended in miscarriages, leaving us devastated. Over time, we reached an uneasy acceptance that having kids might not happen for us. We considered adoption and surrogacy but put those ideas on hold, hoping we might somehow have our own child naturally. Over the years, we've also dealt with pressure from our traditional families, especially my wife. Her family's constant questions and judgment added stress, especially since they couldn't understand why we weren't having kids. There were even nasty remarks, especially from the men in my family, about my manhood since they believed no one in our family had ever had trouble having kids. This year, everything changed. My wife missed her period, then the next, and we got a positive pregnancy test. This pregnancy went longer than any before, reaching 5 months, and we were both ecstatic. We felt like we were finally getting our dream. But recently, something has been gnawing at me. Twice now, my wife has reacted strangely to a TV show with a storyline about a woman who cheats and gets pregnant with another man's child. She's gone from excited to uncomfortable whenever that episode comes on. At first, I brushed it off as pregnancy mood swings, but now I'm not so sure. Ever since that odd reaction to the TV show, I haven't been able to shake a growing feeling that something's off. The show had been our usual entertainment, but now, every time it touches on infidelity, my wife suddenly doesn't want to watch. When I asked her why, she brushed it off, saying it's just her pregnancy hormones. But then it happened a second time, and her reaction was even stronger. She asked to change the channel as soon as the episode started. At first, I tried to reason with myself that this was just paranoia, maybe even a result of all the stress we've been through. But her reactions triggered something in me that I just couldn't ignore. Eventually, I shared my concerns with a close friend, hoping he'd reassure me I was overthinking things. But instead, he suggested that her discomfort might be because she's hiding something. The idea hit hard. I wanted to trust her, but now the thought was planted in my mind, and I couldn't unsee the signs. So I started paying more attention. I noticed little things, like how she's been more protective of her phone. It's subtle, but enough to feed my worry. We've always been open with each other, and suddenly, there's this distance between us. It feels crazy to even consider that she might have been unfaithful, especially with how long we've been together. But something in me needed answers, so I decided to dig a bit deeper. I wanted to avoid any drastic actions, so I figured I'd look through her laptop if I got the chance. I thought it might have her social media open, and I'd get some insight without having to ask directly. I felt terrible even considering this, but the need to know the truth was stronger than my guilt. However, just when I was close to checking, I couldn't handle the weight of my suspicions any longer. I decided to ask her directly. When I asked her why she seemed different this time, why she wasn't interested in the show, and if anything was bothering her, she immediately grew defensive. She got upset, and I could tell she was offended by my questioning. She asked if I was accusing her of something, and I tried to explain that I just needed reassurance, that I'd been feeling anxious. But her anger only grew. She told me she couldn't believe I'd ask something like that after all we've been through together. At that moment, I started to feel guilty. Maybe she was right, maybe this was all in my head, and I was being paranoid for no reason. I tried to apologize, but she was too angry to hear it. She told me to leave for the night, saying she needed space to calm down. I felt terrible as I left, realizing I'd only added more stress to her pregnancy and our relationship. That night away from home was the longest night I'd had in years. I kept replaying everything in my mind, wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. But at the same time, her anger and defensiveness kept nagging at me. If there was nothing to hide, why wouldn't she just reassure me instead of getting so upset? I stayed out for a few nights, hoping she'd have time to cool off. But it seemed her anger only deepened. When I came back, she was distant. She hardly looked at me, and I could tell she was still hurt. I tried to mend things, but the more I tried, the more distant she became. Finally, after days of strained silence, she told me over text that she wanted to separate. I was stunned. The news hit me like a brick, and I couldn't believe what was happening. It felt like our marriage was falling apart before my eyes, and I didn't know how to stop it. Days after she'd asked for a separation, I felt lost. I wanted to give her space, but the uncertainty gnawed at me. The child we'd wanted for so long was finally on the way, yet our marriage seemed to be slipping through my fingers. Despite the guilt from my accusation, I felt I had to know the truth, so I made a plan to look through her laptop when I got home. I needed something solid to either confirm or dismiss my fears. When she finally let me back into the house, things were tense. We avoided talking about the confrontation, and she was still guarded. I waited for a moment when she wasn't around, and I checked her laptop. I was prepared to face whatever I might find. I combed through her messages, social media, anything I could access. But there was nothing, no messages that hinted at another man, no secrets. Just her regular conversations with friends and family. It was almost too clean, and for a second, I wondered if I was just driving myself insane with paranoia. Maybe she really had nothing to hide. Then, I noticed her messages with a guy named Ryan. They weren't suspicious, but I did notice that they talked regularly. There was nothing incriminating, but my mind couldn't help but wonder. Maybe she'd deleted things, or maybe she was more careful in how she communicated with him. I was spinning in circles, and I realized this detective work was just adding to my anxiety. I couldn't confront her about Ryan without looking like a jealous fool, so I decided to let it go, for now. As the weeks went by, I tried my best to focus on preparing for the baby. But the doubt was like a dark cloud hanging over me. One night, I broke down and talked to her again, explaining that my suspicions weren't about her but about my own insecurities. I told her how much I'd wanted this child, how the years of failed attempts had worn on me, and how this sudden pregnancy felt like something out of a dream. I even suggested a prenatal paternity test, hoping to approach it as calmly as possible. Her reaction was brutal. She stood up, stared at me with a mix of hurt and anger, and then walked out of the room without a word. I heard her packing, and I knew I'd gone too far. She left that night and went to stay with her sister. I tried calling, texting, even reaching out to her family, but they told me to leave her alone. Eventually, I got a text from her saying she wanted a divorce. Just like that, the life we'd been building for over a decade felt like it was crumbling. In the days that followed, I was a mess. The separation hit me hard, but I couldn't shake the nagging questions in my mind. I'd wanted this child so much, and now everything felt tainted by my fears and suspicions. As the months passed and I struggled to process everything, I decided that I needed closure once and for all. I realized that once the baby was born, I could request a paternity test without involving her. It felt like my only way to find peace. The baby was born a few months later, and I was invited to meet my daughter. She was beautiful, and holding her was everything I'd ever dreamed. For a brief moment, I felt like I'd been wrong all along and that I'd nearly ruined everything over nothing. But even in that joy, the doubt still lingered. After the visit, I decided to follow through and get the paternity test, hoping to either finally put my fears to rest or know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. When the results came in a week later, my entire world fell apart. I wasn't the father. Reading that report was like being punched in the gut. It felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The relief I'd hoped to feel from finally knowing the truth was nowhere to be found. Instead, all I felt was emptiness. All the months of doubt, the accusations, the fights, it had all led to this. I'd been right to be suspicious, but the reality was even worse than I'd imagined. I confronted her with the results, and she had nothing to say. She couldn't meet my eyes, and that silence said more than any explanation ever could. I realized that the gaslighting, the accusations from her family, the broken trust, all of it had been designed to keep me in the dark, to make me doubt my own instincts. I had been made to feel like the bad guy for questioning her, but now I knew the truth. The divorce proceedings began immediately, and the betrayal felt even deeper as we fought over everything we'd built. The love I'd once felt for her had turned into something unrecognizable, a mix of heartbreak, anger, and profound sadness. I decided I couldn't stay in her daughter's life. The pain of knowing she wasn't mine would only grow if I kept trying to play a fatherly role. It felt like a cruel twist, to have come so close to fatherhood, only to have it ripped away by deceit. In the end, I was left to pick up the pieces of my life alone, wondering how I'd let myself ignore the signs for so long. The truth had come at a steep price, but it was a price I had to pay to finally move on. A year has passed since everything came crashing down. The divorce is finalized, and I've moved away, putting distance between me and the life that I thought was mine. I'd once imagined that learning the truth would bring closure, but moving on has been harder than I'd expected. The betrayal left a deep scar, and I've had to learn to let go of dreams that were built on lies. Reflecting on it all, I see now how much I compromised myself for the idea of a family. I ignored my gut, silenced my instincts, and pushed forward, all for the hope of having a child. In the end, trusting myself was the only thing that brought clarity, even if it came at a high price. As painful as it's been, I'm learning to rebuild. I'm focusing on things I put on hold for years, reconnecting with friends and family who've supported me through the fallout. I've started therapy, working through the doubts and resentment so I can look to the future with a little more hope. And I'm finding peace in knowing that someday, I might have a family built on trust and love. This journey taught me to never ignore that inner voice, no matter how hard it might be to face the truth. If you're dealing with betrayal, listen to yourself. Trust your instincts, and don't let guilt or fear keep you in the dark. And if you found this story helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and take care. If my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories like this.